Hey, it's Ben with SuperPumped Podcast. Welcome to the latest installment of our series on reducing turnover in your business so you can make more money, keep your good employees, and keep your great customers. So in this series, there are really three parts to reducing turnover and eliminating or reducing that expense. And the first part has to do with recruiting the right people. How you go about this recruiting process is really paramount. In previous podcasts, if you missed them, I talked about the 10-minute rule. I also talked about the critical importance of current employees referring good people to your company. And then I talked about maybe the most important thing on that front end, which is figuring out the why of why someone wants to work for your company. We've gone through that. If you missed any of those, go back and check those out. But today I want to turn the page and talk about onboarding. And this is a point where many companies I see fumble the ball. And the reason I know this is because I've lived it. My own companies have fumbled the ball in this regard. But so often, because we put so much into this process of crafting ads and placing ads and going through interviews and that whole vetting process, that when we finish that, we almost think job over, like we're crossing the finish line. But the reality is, we haven't even started. That person hasn't worked 1 day, 1 minute in your organization. And yet you've already put all this money out there and all this time out there. So you've already invested in them and the process, and you haven't seen one iota of ROI. So first thing we need to think about is the recruiting process is just almost getting yourself to the starting line. It's the pre-training and it's going down to the starting line. When I run marathons, I don't get to the starting line and they're throwing a party, right? There's no party at the starting line. Yet so often our HR people, our managers, or even our owner operators, they get to the point where they're ready to hire someone and it's like they're throwing a little party in their head. Not the time to party yet because you're not at the finish line. That's the first thing, is to shift our mindset. So the second part, you've got recruiting, onboarding, and then retaining employees, right? So onboarding, think about that word. On board. This is the critical phase where they go from somebody who has great potential, at least you think they do, and checks the right boxes, or at least most of them, to them being on board, being on the ship, on the plane, on the boat, whatever that is, being an actual productive employee in your company. And this isn't a given, because this is a very difficult dance, employers and employees dance. I often think about it like dating, okay? So a lot of times, if someone catches our eye and we're interested in them in a dating romantic arena, right? There's a vetting process. So we dig to get out, to figure out some information about them. And that could be some online sleuthing. That could be asking other people who know them. Maybe you have common friends or family, and just gathering a little more information that way. And then seeing, is there mutual interest? You may have interest, but they may have no interest, or vice versa. They may be interested in you, but you not in them. So figuring out, is there mutual interest? And if that's the case, then there's this leap you take where you ask somebody, at least in my era, and maybe it's a little different now with some of the younger folks, but you ask for that first date, right? So you haven't hit the finish line just because the initial vetting process seemed promising, right? And there's some interest and some attraction and maybe some commonality, right? You're still at the beginning, at the infancy. As an individual in this dating process, you're still trying to continue to woo that person, to be a part of your life, or at least to explore what that might look like for the two of you to get to know each other better and see where this goes. It's the same thing when we hire new employees. It's a wooing process. It's a mutual discovery. And yet, here's where I see employers starting to fumble the ball. They get to the point where they're ready to do that offer. And they maybe make the offer and the person says, yeah, that sounds good. I think I'd like to at least explore working for your company. And understand the mindset of so many employees is, I'll give it a try. But I'm not overly committed to it. Just like at the early part of dating, you may go on a date and both of you are like, "Yeah, this just wasn't a fit," and wish each other well, hopefully. But in the employer realm, I see so many employers get needy and desperate and demanding at that point. Do you know what happens? They don't close the deal. So think about dating. Like, there's some mutuality. You're ready to ask them on a date. You don't say, "Okay, let's go out and I'm going to pick you up at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. So be ready. And we're going to go do this and this and this." Most women, if I tried that, would be like, "What? Who are you? You're going to tell me when you're picking me up and what we're going to do and how this is going to go down?" You're like, "Heck no." Wrong. And you'd probably never see them again. And yet employers oftentimes, because they are needy, they're like, "Okay, we need you to start on Monday. It's going to be from 8 to 5. Go down here and get your drug test." And there's this litany of demands put on a person, right? Now, I saw this in my own company, and here's why. So in my commercial cleaning business, we were scattered over 3 states, multiple counties. It wasn't feasible necessarily to bring everybody into the central office for the interviewing part. In fact, we found it much more productive for the central office to do a lot of the legwork in placing the ads and doing some early screens and maybe some phone screens. But then those in-person interviews we left to the on-site manager. So whatever facility the potential cleaner was working in, they would go and interview with that manager. But what we were finding was we would have what we thought were really good, strong candidates, but then somewhere between making the offer and them starting and sticking, we were losing them. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, what are we doing wrong here? I feel like we're doing everything right. So I dug in and I began to watch and just listen and observe the process from our managers. Everything from the phone call they made to tell them that we wanted to offer them a position, to starting time and all of that. And here's what I learned. The managers who'd been holding the bag, let's say a manager had a crew of 12 people and they were down 3 because of turnover, right? So they're down 3 people, which means they're riding their other 9 really hard and they're probably getting some blowback from those folks. And the manager is probably picking up the slack on that, right? So they're at a bit of a breaking point, right? So what does the manager want to do? The manager wants to fill that position as soon as possible. So they would come at it when it was like they had a potential new hire right there in the cradle of their hands, but then they would mess it up. There's a great scene in the movie Tommy Boy. For those of you who have seen it, it's Chris Farley and David Spade. And they are tasked with going out and selling Callahan brake pads. And they are just getting their butts kicked out on the road. Every door and every meeting they go into, it is no. As that happens, they begin to get more desperate and more cuckoo and more just off the chains. There's a scene in a diner where David Spade, he's holding the roll and this is my sale. And then I get so excited that I'm just overexcited and I start trying way too hard and doing too many things. And then next thing I know, I kill my sale because I'm putting all these demands on things. I'm just so wound tight on the whole thing, desperate, demanding, needy. In the end, he gets the woman. In this particular case, he's trying to get her to fire up the fryer after they've had another long day of hearing no on the sales street. And David Spade says, "That's interesting. Why don't you sell like that out there? Be real, but also be engaging." And this light goes off that, man, the more needy and demanding you are, the more you're going to kill your sale. It's the same thing with onboarding. If you're needy and demanding and you need them right now because you're 3 people down and what are you going to do? You're tired of working that. Who wants to work there? Already, you're starting to stress them out. This potential hire, right? They're like, "Yeah, this place sounds kind of rough. I don't want to be, okay, I go there and I'm the 10th person, but now we're still right off the bat. I don't know what I'm doing and I'm having to cover somebody else." That stresses me. I don't want to do that. Guess what? Either they don't show up at all, they just ghost you, which is pretty common, or they show up for a couple of nights and because you're so needy and demanding, they don't come back. That's what I found our managers were doing. They were dumping all of their anxiousness and frustration on that potential new hire even before they were onboarded. So we began to change that. We began to think of it more as a wooing process. So instead of, here's when you need to start, blah, 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 we would offer them the position and then say, when would work best for you? Now, in our head, we're thinking, we need to get this thing filled as soon as possible. But if it was the right candidate, I would rather wait 2 weeks than start over from the get-go on the whole recruiting process and find another qualified candidate, because that whole process is both costly and time-consuming, right? So if you have to wait a couple weeks, that's okay. And oftentimes, let's be honest, the person who's looking for that job, some of them say, you know what they say? We got to give 2 weeks notice to our current employer. That's a good employee. They're not leaving their current employer high and dry, right? That's the person you have a lot of respect for that has a lot of integrity. Or maybe they need to work out childcare, or maybe they need to figure out their transportation piece of things. Even something as simple as, just give me a couple days to figure out the bus lines and where I transfer and how I get there. Something seemingly simple like that, and giving them the time can make all the difference. Because you still come across as charming and you're not acting desperate. You're not acting like putting high pressure, high stress on them, right? You're working at their speed. You're continuing to woo them. You're continuing to value them above you. And that's an important thing. Now, the flip side can also occur where, let's say you have a candidate that you really want to hire and they've been out of work for a time and they need money and they need it bad. Maybe you're thinking it's a Tuesday and you'll just start them the following Monday, but you say, when would work for you? And they say, I'm ready anytime. And sure, it might work better for you to start them the following Monday. It gives you a little more lead time on training and trainers and curriculum and all that. But what if you pep that up? What if you move your timetable up to meet their timetable? What if you say, you know what? Let me make a couple phone calls this afternoon, but I think I can start you tomorrow. And then you call them back and you say, hey, I get it. We all need to make money. I get that you've been out of work for a little spell here. We can start you tomorrow. What does that say to that employee? It says, I hear you. I hear your position in life, your personal need, and I'm working with you. How much of a difference does that make? Going back to this dating analogy, right? If you're interested in someone and you say, would you like to go out sometime? And you don't tell them you're going to go out this time on this day with me and we're going to do this activity. And then you start talking through like, oh, when would work for you? And they may say, I'm a student and I have class these nights, so maybe this time, but I'm out of town to go somewhere, whatever. And you make it work for whatever works for them. You know what? You put that relationship off on the right foot. But on the other hand, if they're all gung-ho, my wife and I, we met on an airplane and we went out the next day. That worked for us. Now, it was because I was leaving Boston in 5 days, so there was no time to wait. But that interest was there, that we were both raring to go on this thing. So figure out what works mutually for the both of you. Because if you don't, you're going to kill this hiring process before you even get them on board. You have to think that this process of slaying the turnover dragon, it is critically important that you get them on board. Because if you do all the work, the pre-work of reference checks and ads and interviews and vetting and all that, and you don't even get them to the point of coming on board with you, that's all just cost that is escalated, that is eating into your bottom line, and that isn't doing you any good. So this is our SuperPumped podcast today on turnover, how you can reduce it, how you can get these folks on your team, on board, whatever train you're headed down, and make sure that they're an important part of your group. It really is a process. It's a process of really building trust, of having the ability for the employee and the employer to trust one another, to work together, and to begin to form this incredible friendship. And when you think about it as a starting line, when you think about it that this is the beginning, this could last for many years. And so I've talked about Tommy Boy, but I want to leave you with a quote from the movie Casablanca. In Casablanca, they say, and it's the famous line, "This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship." As you think about onboarding your employees, think about the fact this could be the beginning of a very long-term relationship with that employee who is incredibly productive, incredibly loyal, and incredibly lucrative for your company. Thanks for joining me today. I'm super pumped you did, and I will see you next time. Thanks for joining me today on the SuperPumped Business Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, I have 2 quick next steps for you. First, subscribe or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And second, jump on over to superpumped.com to find out all the incredible ways we can help you launch your super pumped business. Keep well, and I'll see you next time.